Well, hello and welcome to the New Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobinski and I will be your host on this adventure. Today we're going to be addressing the question, did Idaho really ban the teaching of critical race theory? And what's in store for Idaho's preschool little bill that they got cooking here in the state, which has already been implemented in other states? What is the motivation behind that? And what are the chances of that bill actually getting approved now that they have managed to get rid of one of the opposing voices in Idaho's House of Representatives? All that and more on today's New Book of Daniel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can go ahead and click that subscribe button, go ahead and click the bell, and you'll get notified every time we go live. And whenever we upload new videos. Of course, you can always catch my writings on UncoverDC.com and also my new website, trueidahonews.com. I'll be referencing several of the articles that I've written on both of those websites today, those news websites. The first thing that I want to start off with, though, is the situation here in Idaho with Mr. Aaron Von Ellinger, who was the representative from District 6, who just resigned yesterday. We'll talk about what led to that and what that means for Idaho's future. Turns out that Mr. Von Ellinger, Air Force veteran, he's a single man and has a propensity to ask out single women. And let's just say something went down in his apartment on March 9th. The person he was with accused him of some unwanted behavior that was reported then to the Idaho Master Sergeant at Arms in the Idaho House, then got reported to the police. And of course, the police went to investigate, and all of that turned into nothing for a couple of days. Police stopped their investigation. And then the Idaho House leadership moved forward to have Mr. Von Ellinger investigated on the ethics committee. I need to talk a little bit about this because it kind of sets up the question about critical race theory being taught in Idaho. There was a bill that was presented to the Idaho House that was kicked back. This is it came from JFAC, the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, and this is a grant from the federal government, from the National Board of Education, the Department of Education, to implement a preschool program for kids 0 through 5, and you can get money for your state to teach these preschool kids, and it's like free preschool for the parents. And they get to have, all this wonderful stuff. Well, guess what? This is a $6 million grant for this year alone. Then it's $6 million the year after that, and $6 million the year after that. That's what the federal government is giving. What is their motivation? One doesn't just give away this kind of money without a reason. Not the kindness of their heart, guarantee you that. This program has already been implemented in other states. I will explain as we go some of what goes on with that program. But it got kicked back in the House. They rejected the ballot measure, the bill. Mainly because the organization that is going to be contracted in Idaho, and the only organization that qualified for the grant, is run by a bunch of people who support leftist causes. In fact, they support a lot of social justice teaching. A lot of the books that they recommend are they basically teach preschool kids that racism is a white person problem. They teach it's okay for Billy to want to wear dresses, this kind of thing that you would not normally expect to be seeing in a preschool environment. And of course, I actually challenged my representative who voted for that bill. And she said, well, as long as it's for the children, I'm going to vote for it for them to have money for preschool. I said, but did you realize this is what the kind of stuff they're teaching? And 20 years from now, Idaho is going to have this whole mentality of what they're teaching in the classroom. Well, she said, I know some of the people who are going to be on the front lines teaching, and they would never teach that to their children. And I think that's kind of short-sighted, because you really, when you have somebody receiving the money, that then goes to deciding what's going to get taught in the classroom, right? Well, this bill got kicked back, and it went back to the JFAC, the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee, and you cannot resend a bill. So what they did was they took this roughly $6 million, they added $100 of state money to it and said, okay, here's a new bill number, it's a new bill. And this time it passed the Senate by a mere 1 vote. And now it's been sitting on the House now for several weeks. So why is it sitting there? Because they knew that it was at least 1 vote short of passing. The governor wants this bill passed because the governor of Idaho, Mr. Brad Little, is part of the National Governors Association. And the National Governors Association is in bed with the World Economic Forum, who, if you follow them at all, then you already know that they are moving to, shall we say, federalize every state so that all states operate the same. This is basically the dissolution of the 10th Amendment. It's trying, how do you get to all 50 states without affecting the president, without making moves in the executive branch of the federal government? You use the National Governors Association. You simply affect 50 people, and that's what's been going on. You have a Lieutenant Governors Association, you have a Governors Association, the National Governors Association, and you also have the National Attorney Generals Association. So all these different organizations, and as you read up on these organizations, this is not stuff you find on mainstream news, by the way. You have to be looking for it. You go, so you know what to look for. You go look for these organizations. You find out what kind of platforms they push. It's all leftist agendas. It's all leftist agendas. I was talking with our lieutenant governor here in Idaho. I said, do you go to the National Lieutenant Governors Association? She said, no, I do not. I asked her why. She said, because it's very left-wing. Here we have Republicans, we have Democrats, all talking about how to implement left-wing policies. So why would I want to participate in that? To which I heartily applaud Lieutenant Governor McGeehan for that. So anyways, this is all being pushed by them. These grants, all this is part of trying to destabilize the lines of our federalism to take away the ability of a state to govern itself. At which point, if they succeed in all of this, then in essence, we have 50 counties in the United States. We don't have independent states anymore. That's what they're pushing for. So we have to be able to push back at this. This has not succeeded yet. So we have to be able to push back. I'm not afraid to talk about this. But Mr. Von Ellinger back in Idaho, let's go back to that little story. He did this little thing and they had this police investigation. Well, they stopped the police investigation on March 16th. On March 17th, the House leadership wrote a letter to the chair of the ethics committee here in the House in Idaho. And they said, and I quote, that they were informed that the law enforcement, and I'm quoting now, the law enforcement investigation would not be moving forward at the request of redacted. Redacted, usually it's the person who made the allegation in the first place. Based upon the complaint being brought to our attention, and now that it appears we will no longer be interfering with an ongoing investigation, we feel compelled to bring this complaint before the Ethics and House Policy Committee. That's the first point I want to make, that they did not bring the charges of an ethics charge against Representative Von Ellinger until after the police had dropped their investigation. So this investigation is going on, and they say, okay, now we're going to have this investigation, this hearing on April 28th. April 28th, just so you know, symbolically was the sexual oppression, Me Too kind of thing, denim for somebody. I didn't follow that all that closely, but they set this date for April 28th, and on April 20th, they set forth the rules for this hearing, what the ethics committee was going to do. There was 13 rules. Actually, there was more than that. There was 13 objections to the rules, and True Idaho News, which is the website that I now publish, their lawyers released this letter. They said, here's our 13 objections to the rules. I'm just going to tell you 4 of them. Rule number 7B, the committee chair, Representative Sage Dixon, has claimed the right, get this, to, quote, rule upon any question or admissibility of relevance of evidence, motion or procedure, or any other matter. This is like the prosecutor and the judge being the same person. Would you want to go into a trial where the prosecutor is also the judge? I talked with people who attended the hearing on the 28th, and they said that's exactly what it was like. The prosecutor's attorney would ask a question, it would be fine. The defense question would ask the same kind of question to another witness, and the committee said, "No, objection, we're not going to allow that question." It was kind of a kangaroo court stage. Rule number 7C, the committee may exact from a witness self-incriminating testimony. In other words, suspending the representative's rights, his Fifth Amendment rights. Here's what I want to remind you of. This was an ongoing police investigation. Now you said, wait a minute, Dan, didn't they stop it on March 16th? Au contraire. There was rumor that the police had reopened the investigation. So yours truly called the Boise Police Department. I said, what's the status of the investigation? And to Representative Von Ellinger, he said, oh, it's an open investigation. I said, when was it opened? Oh, April 16th. So it was closed on March 15th and reopened on April 16th? Yes. Okay, March 16th closed, April 16th opened. Why was it closed? Why was it opened? They wouldn't tell me exactly why it closed, other than to say that there was not enough evidence or something. And then all of a sudden on the 16th of April, the situation was such that they could reopen the investigation. Okay. Again, they wouldn't tell me anything more than that. But I said, is the investigation currently still open? And they said, yes. This was 2 days ago that I asked this question. So here we have the House leadership in Idaho saying, now that they've closed the investigation on March 16th, on March 17th, we want the investigation with the ethics committee to go forward because we're not going to be interfering with the police investigation. But on April 16th, the police reopened the investigation and the House leadership doesn't stop the ethics investigation. Think about that. And then on April 20th, they set forth the rules of how this ethics investigation is supposed to go. And one of the rules, Rule 7C, is that they can exact from the witness self-incriminating testimony. And I will go on to tell you that they said that in the rules that if he does not answer the question, if he claims his Fifth Amendment rights and does not testify against himself, then they will hold him in contempt. And if they hold him in contempt, then that is a reason to expel him from the House. Does this sound ethical to you? I'm going to keep going. Rule number 11 of their rules that the chair, Mr. Sage Dixon, reserves the right to preclude or truncate any witness testimony that he deems inappropriate, immaterial, or irrelevant to the purposes of the hearing. This is all, they say this is all in accordance with Rule 45 of the House rules. In nowhere in the House rules does the chair of an ethics committee get to truncate or preclude any witness testimony if he thinks it's inappropriate. Again, this is the judge and the prosecutor being the same person. In no way do they ever get to have a fair defense, too, because they said they're going to have this trial in one day. It's only going to last one day. Prosecution in the morning, defense in the afternoon. Not that it was officially a trial, but for all intents and purposes, it was. So how do you can't even present your defense. Rule number 14 gives Chairman Dixon the ability to modify the hearing rules at any time without notice during the actual hearing, so long as he has consent of 2 other committee members. Again, since when does the judge get to change the rules midstream? Does this sound ethical to you at all? I am not saying that Mr. Von Ellinger was innocent or guilty. I'm not taking his side at all, in any way, shape, or form, for or against him. I am simply pointing out that this whole thing was way lopsided. This ethics committee acting far from ethical. We have Mr. Brent Crane, Representative Brent Crane from District 13 in Idaho. He's also a member of the ethics committee. He told von Ellinger's lawyer early on, he says, we have the votes to expel Mr. von Ellinger, and we intend to see that through. He intends to make sure that Mr. von Ellinger gets expelled. I want to refer Mr. Crane to House Rule 45, which is a recommendation for expulsion shall only be based upon a finding beyond reasonable doubt that misconduct includes the commission of a felony or the use of public office for financial gain. That's the only two reasons. So when the lawyers of the Representative von Ellinger were asking, what's this guy being charged with? They said, well, he violated the respectful workplace policy. There is no respectful workplace policy. It was proposed, never voted on. Then they said, well, he's engaged in conduct unbecoming of a representative. Okay, guess what? That's also not a felony. So again, I'm not coming to von Ellinger's defense. I'm just saying there are rules in place, and they're saying we're going to operate outside of these rules because we want to. And by the way, Mr. Crane, Representative Crane, listen to this. In 2016, we had a senator, Senator Jim Guthrie, and a representative, Christy Perry, who were having an affair for several years. And it came to public awareness because Mr. Guthrie's wife found the sexts on his phone. And I say sexts. They were actually sexting back and forth during session while they were on the House floor and the Senate floor, which, by the way, is a felony in the state of Idaho. And yet here we have Representative Crane being quoted in the Idaho State Journal, quote, when a leader fails morally, it has a ripple effect. Moral failures cause the public to mistrust their leaders, and we must do everything we can to restore that trust. Failure is not final and does not have to be final. Gee, Mr. Crane, here you have a senator and a representative having an affair for multiple years. Who knows what kind of our tax dollars they were spending in their fun. And we know it's a felony, and yet you just want to write it off. Failure is not final. It doesn't have to be final. But before you heard an ounce of evidence during the hearing, you tell the accused lawyers that you're going to have him expelled? What's the reason? What's going on, Representative Crane? How come you can't just listen for the evidence to be presented and then make your case, prejudging the outcome? I'm not sure I exactly agree with this. And let me talk about the Attorney General here. We have an Attorney General who, during the Guthrie and Perry situation, here's the Attorney General saying the Idaho Attorney General's office does not have the authority to investigate legislators. So it cannot look into the alleged affair between Guthrie and Perry and whether public funds might have been used. Quote, unquote, from the Idaho State Journal, August 18, 2016. Well, guess who was representing the state in the trial 2 days ago against Representative von Ellinger? Rule number 4 of the committee's rules for procedure for the hearing of von Ellinger says, quote, counsel for the committee will include counsel from the office of the Attorney General and the firm of Holland and Hart, LLP. So we have the Attorney General inserting itself in this case, but not when Senator Guthrie is having his way with Representative Perry. Holland and Hart, by the way, is the go-to office that Speaker Scott Bedke uses. There is a legal fund that has millions of dollars. They just appropriated $4 million for the legal fund for the House. And Scott Bedke, representative from District 27, is the sole identifier. He's the sole person who can decide how that money gets spent. So Holland and Hart is his go-to legal team. I haven't officially gotten word from this, but my bet would be that Mr. Speaker says this is a House issue, so we're going to continue to fund some of our taxpayer dollars over to Holland and Hart to go after von Ellinger. Again, I'm not defending von Ellinger. I'll talk about what happened in his case here in a bit. So, House Ethics Committee, as I already pointed out, they, on the March 16th, they had not gone to investigate because there was an active police investigation. That investigation was halted on the 16th. Allegedly, when you read the letter, that House leadership sent to the Ethics Committee. It says that they learned that that the investigation was requested to be stopped by redacted. Usually, 99% of the time when you see that, it's the person who was assaulted who requests the police investigation. If the person then says, you know what, I'm done with it, don't pursue it, that's when the police say, okay, well, there's no reason to press the charge. So they drop the investigation. That's what the letter says from the House leadership to the House Ethics Committee. So how did they find out? How did the people learn, and why did they write that? Then when I call the police, they say, no, that wasn't the case. They say there wasn't enough evidence, they had to stop. And then they restart on the 16th because the conditions are there, and then they've already moved forward with the investigation and the House doesn't call it off. I think that's an ethical problem, especially when they're asking Mr. Von Ellinger to deny his Fifth Amendment rights during an open police investigation. Does this sound ethical to you at all? So, by the way, the title of this whole thing is Does Critical Race Theory, did they really ban it in Idaho? Remember, I started it out talking about this bill. They want this $6 billion to go to this preschool education. All of this factors in because Von Ellinger said that he was against this new Senate bill that got the extra $100 tacked onto it to fund this preschool program. All right. Let me move on and tell you a little story. Here it is. Biden this past couple days. Here's what Biden's $1.8 trillion American Families Plan is about. Sweeping $1.8 trillion aimed at domestic priorities like education and childcare to be paid for by extra taxes on the wealthy. Now, I'm going to skip over all this. Basically, what he wants to do is basically double the tax of people I'm going to mess it up here. I need to be careful. Cost of the plan. Capital gains tax. Thank you very much. Going from 20% to 39.6%, basically doubling it. Anybody here earns more than $1 million annually, your taxes are going to double over and above that. That's what he's going to pay for it, allegedly. We've got all this money going to universal kindergarten. Universal kindergarten paid for by the state. Have you read any kind of dystopian novels that talk about this kind of stuff where the state teaches all the kids as soon as they're born? Birth through 5 so children can thrive is the new program that got cooking now. That's what's being pushed. This is a universal instruction in Biden's new package worth $200 billion. He also wants to, by the way, add 12 weeks of paid leave and free college tuition for the first 2 years of community college, an expanded child tax credit, all of this stuff paid for. But the point is he's going to be putting these 0 through 5-year-olds into universal preschool paid for with yours and my tax dollars. And this is where this grant comes in. And remember, we already pushed back against this critical race theory, and that's why that bill got rejected by the House. Well, in all of that, when all of that came up, they also have this critical race theory, and I've done some podcasts on this, and I've written some articles on this, where they have stopped funding the universities here in Idaho because of all the critical race theory. They got students coming to the legislators complaining that they're being mocked and shamed in their classes because of critical race theory classes instruction. If you're white, if you're Christian, if you're conservative, you get mocked, you get criticized, you get ridiculed, embarrassed. You have to go through a tunnel of shame, and people yell at you. And it's mandatory. In fact, at Boise State University, there are 4 mandatory social justice classes required before you can graduate. 0 classes on the Constitution, 0 classes on American government in any way, shape, or form, but 4 classes on social justice theory, including critical race theory. And so the House passed House Bill 377, which went to the Senate and passed and went to the governor's desk, and the governor signed it. And the only reason, I was talking with a legislator this morning, the only reason a legislated that the governor even signed that was so that the House could then appropriate all the monies for the universities, because they were holding back on the bills until there was no critical race theory being taught. That's the question. And it's a watered down bill. This is the problem. The only thing House Bill 377 really does is it stops a class from making it compulsory that you have to agree with the teaching. The classes can still present the data. They can still teach on critical race theory. And people are out there screaming, oh, they're going to stop. You're not going to be able to teach about history and racism in America. That's not the case at all. You can still teach on all of that. House Bill 377, in essence, says you can't make it compulsory that a student has to participate in these demeaning activities and feel shamed and blah, blah, blah. And so that was a big argument against this $6 billion federal grant for this preschool grant, right? That was part of it. So now we got all these House people who were sitting on the fence and, you know what, I'm not sure I want critical race theory taught to 0 through 5-year-olds. And so now that we've got 377 passed, maybe we can go ahead and pass this new Senate Bill 1193, which is going to authorize $6 billion for this preschool. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. The problem is everything is sound bites. They're missing the details. They're missing the bigger picture, because this $6 million grant does not go all to the front room classrooms. There are only going to be 16 of these preschools initially in the first year. And then keep in mind, this is a 3-year deal. It's $6 million a year for 3 years. Only $1 million goes to the front line. The other $5 million is going to be used to create an infrastructure in the state of Idaho for, listen up, to connect early intervention services. So in other words, if you're a mom and a dad of a preschooler, we're going to create an infrastructure and help families understand child development and connect to early intervention services. Here, mom and dad, here's the state services that's going to be able to help you. Oh, we need to get you in the system. Your name, address, phone number, the ages of your children, dad's occupation, and your income. Mom, your occupation, your income, all this data getting reported into the system. And since it's a federal grant, guess what? It gets reported to the federal government. It connects families to community services through strengthening partnerships and transitions. Same deal. Facilitates career pathways for early care and education professionals. In other words, we're going to be educating people with this money how to be preschool teachers, again, creating more state employees who will be working for the state on this grant. They might be working for these independents up front, but it's all funded by the state. And so guess who, when you write the check, guess who gets to dictate what's going on? Think about that. Strengthening partners, I said that already. Building early childhood workforce capacity. So I just I'm talking about that. And then make integrated data accessible and use the data to ensure accountability and quality, making sure that all of this stuff gets connected back to the grant. So all of the information has to go back to the grant giver. Whoever writes the grant, the Department of Education at the federal level, they get all of this data. This program has already been established in multiple states already, California, Georgia, even Florida, I hear. And this is crazy what's going on with this. So what is critical race theory? That's almost beside the point. It's this postmodern framework, right, of what we're looking at everything through the lens of a oppressed Black person. Because when I was in my doctoral work, that's what they were teaching us about critical race theory. But listen to the text of how Senate Bill 1193. And how they're going to use this funds. This is section 3, verbatim out of the bill. Money is appropriated for this act for the preschool development grant birth through 5 renewal. And if you want to look this up online, this is what you want to look for. The preschool development grant birth through 5 renewal. You can do a search for that. And it's going to show you the states that already have it in place, and you can read what they're doing. And this is how they've gotten around this. This is so funny. Because the argument was that they're going to be able to use this money. Whoever writes the checks dictates the curriculum. Well, listen how they've changed this now. Whoever writes the checks, right, the funds shall not be used to dictate the curricula for use by local collaboratives. Local collaboratives are the local preschools that are going to be teaching this stuff. Local collaboration, stakeholder participation shall include. In other words, these people are going to be the ones who decide what the curriculum is going to be. Parents and families. Yay! They list that first for a reason. Let's continue. Early childhood educators. Who might have an agenda? You don't know. A representative from the State Board of Education, who will definitely have an agenda. At least one representative from the local K-12 school district, who also has an agenda because they get their money from the state and from the federal government as well. And at least 3 community participants from a mix of public, private, nonprofit, faith-based, government, healthcare, and civic organizations. Okay? Listen to this. You think the parents are going to have the voice of what kind of curriculum gets chosen? All of those organizations right there are going to be aligned with what the federal government wants. Those people are going to outvote the parents. It's just a walk around. That's all it is. Local collaboratives shall be financially self-sufficient, relying on local funding sources after the activities of the preschool grant birth through 5 renewal are completed. The State Board of Education shall oversee the grant and subgrantees to ensure that activities, projects, objectives, and outcomes are met, and that federal requirements, reports, and deadlines outlined in the grant are satisfied. Really? Can you just see what this leads to? Put the dots together. Put the dots together. We're going to be collecting data from everybody who's got newborns, young families. We're going to now track these families and report back to the federal government, everything. And it's not just a hop, skip, and a jump. It's just a skip to go from collecting this data to creating a social justice credit score, a social credit score. I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you've been supporting candidates. We can't provide that for you. If you support these candidates over here or this cause over here, if you get involved, then we can support you on this. And that may be hyperbolic, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry, Mr. Jones, you attended this event and that's just not approved by our committee. So your family's not going to get the funding. That's the ability they're going to have to track. You may think, oh, Daniel, you're just doing this conspiracy theory stuff. Watch. I've got a question here. It says, will the data be used to force parents to place their children in these programs or be cited for abuse? That's a good question. I have not the answer for it. I have not the answer. So I need to wrap this up by talking a little bit about Mr. Von Ellinger and how his little trial came to a close. Because Mr. Von Ellinger's by the way, Mr. Von Ellinger did pass 3 lie detector tests. 3 separate lie detector tests. The accuser was behind the curtain. She testified. It was very dramatic. I was not there. People that I talked to said it was very dramatic, very believable. It basically comes down to a he said, she said. So the ethics committee said, you know, we're going to take consent out of the picture. We're not going to even consider consent. So whether or not she gave consent, they're not even going to consider. The fact that he did this is apparently what needed to be the issue. By the way, they did bring up everybody that this guy has dated in recent history, and they drilled him. They brought up they were not allowed to talk to anybody because Jane Doe was unidentified, and they weren't allowed to talk about her past in any way, shape, or form. Just the event that happened at his apartment on the 9th, and then they dissected every date he's ever been on for the past couple of years. And basically, they described him as having a predatory nature. Whether or not that's true, I am not the decider of. That's for God to decide. But the committee voted unanimously to first censure for his behavior unbecoming of the legislator and suspend him from being able to operate in the House, not only for the rest of this session, but for all of next session, which is the second half of his term. So basically, emasculating him, pardon the pun, from being able to operate as a legislator. So he was censured and then suspended because of conduct unbecoming. That was their recommendation. The ethics committee had no authority to invoke that recommendation. And then they recommended, because he exercised his Fifth Amendment during the hearing, because it was a setup, because they asked him to elaborate on the events that happened that evening. Everything that happened that evening had already been written out and was submitted as evidence already. It was simply an attempt to embarrass him publicly. This is what I mean, unethical ethics committee. It was simply an attempt to embarrass him publicly. Again, he may be guilty as sin. Maybe he did force himself on the woman. I am not the person to say yes or no. But everything there was already written out, step by step, of what he did. He admitted everything of what he did. They wanted him to retell the story to the court, even though they already had the evidence, because he says, you know what, I am going to exercise my Fifth Amendment right here, and you already have it in writing. Because he did that, they say that he then violated the rules of the committee, for which they had the right to hold him in contempt, for which they had the right to expel him. So, because of his behavior, conduct unbecoming, he gets censured and suspended from all being able to vote, and then to be expelled because he exercised his Fifth Amendment rights. Basically, then what happens is it has to go to a vote to the floor. So anybody who's looking at this from a strictly ethical point of view, from the ethics of the way the House ran this committee, I mean, the way the committee ran this hearing, if they were to say, you know what, we think this whole committee hearing was a kangaroo court, and so we're not going to vote to expel the man, because all of a sudden you've got to know that the press would have excoriated those people as someone who supported a rapist. And that would have been all over the news. Anybody who said this was an unethical hearing, shouldn't have happened this way, his rights were violated, anybody who would have stood up for that and said this is wrong finding, they would have been nailed as someone who supports a rapist. So I think seeing that, Von Ellinger didn't want to put the rest of the people in the House through that, so he just resigned. What did that do? That took away one opposing vote for Senate Bill 1193. And as I stated at the beginning, the House has been sitting on Senate Bill 1193 until the end. They've been putting it off. They've had this on their desk for close to a month. They've been putting it off, waiting for the Von Ellinger case to be heard, which is why they pushed for this hearing to happen, because now they probably have enough votes to pass 1193. They really need to learn about 1193. Just because House Bill 377 passed that quote unquote prevents the teaching of critical race theory in Idaho, what our House members need to realize is that Senate Bill 1193 is not just about teaching kids critical race theory. It's about creating an infrastructure, $5 million a year for the next 3 years to create an infrastructure to collect data on families and report it back to the federal government, to get people into the system. This is a gulp, a sip, if you will, into the socialist structure of Idaho. This should be voted against. I strongly believe that every House member in the state of Idaho needs to vote no on Senate Bill 1193. Because you take a look at what's going to happen to the state in 15, 20 years, when these kids are now old enough to vote, they go through this program, and all the social interaction, the sovereignty of Idaho will be gone if this bill is allowed to pass. And that, my friends, it answers the question, does House Bill 377 really restrict the teaching of critical race theory in Idaho? No, it doesn't. It simply stops us from being mandatory, compulsive agreeers to the concept. And we have the danger of a House who might vote for 1193 because they think the danger is past. It's not. All right, with that, I need to wrap up. We've been going too long. This is Daniel Bobinski. You've been listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast. You find my writings over at uncoverdc.com. I've got an article on much of what I talked about here. You can go over there and look it up. I also have some articles on this over at trueidahonews.com. You can read those articles, share them with your friends. If you live in Idaho, contact your state reps. Let them know this is not what Idaho needs. This is a socialist Marxist bait, and it is very dangerous. If you want to get a hold of me, you can follow me on social media. You can, of course, leave some comments down below. I appreciate that. Any comments you want to leave, questions you want to leave, I'll try to answer them. You can, of course, subscribe to the podcast. Hit that little subscribe button. Hit the little bell to get notified. And if you would care to follow me on social media, you can go to Facebook, Gab, and MeWe on Look for the New Book of Daniel. So with that, I'm going to sign off. This is Daniel Bobinski with the New Book of Daniel podcast. I thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week on the New Book of Daniel show. Until then, be blessed.